All right, so without further ado, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome Harry McLaren to BeerCon4. So a very brief bit of background, and then I'll let Harry do his stuff. We met Harry for the first time at Cyber Scotland Connect in September 2019, and he and Stuart Hurst were putting on a gig that they invited us along to, and the Beer Farmers did a little bit of a thing. But in the Brewdog on Lothian Road in Edinburgh, we devised and concocted a thing called BeerCon. And Harry was kicking around at that, and Stu, and we were all having a beer and having a good time, and throwing a few ideas around. And out of that came BeerCon1. So it gives me enormous pleasure, again, to welcome Harry to BeerCon4. Harry, the floor is yours, mate. Carry on.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. That seemed like a very long and short time ago. Right. Thank you all for attending my talk. I'm going to be talking about Security Operations 101, aka being blue. My background is in cybersecurity. I've been an analyst, an engineer, a consultant, but my current job is I'm a senior product manager, and I'm also the security engineering squad lead at a company called Senson. As Mike mentioned, I co-founded Cyber Scotland Connect, a community group in Edinburgh, and I'm also dyslexic, just FYI. Very quickly about Senson, we're a startup, we build cybersecurity software, we're remote first and always hiring, so please do check us out if you're ever interested in learning a bit more about our company. I'm going to accept questions all throughout via Slido. Feel free to just go to slido.com and use the tag blue, or you can use the QR code if you trust me, and that'll be at the bottom throughout. So coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about my journey so you understand a bit more about who I am and what I do. We're going to talk about the importance of cybersecurity as a profession and as an industry. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the blue team from my point of view, careers within the blue team, and then we're going to talk about competencies, both technical and behavioural. So, my journey. I started in computer support way back in 2006 when I was about 18 years old. I was a technician, fixing, repairing computers. I then did a degree in cybersecurity and digital forensics at Edinburgh Napier, up in Edinburgh, where I still live today. I then joined a company called Adama as a senior analyst, and later was promoted as an engineer. And then moved into consultancy for about 3 or 4 years, helping design and build security operations centres. And then I became Adama's first product lead, focusing on the detection and response domain. And then that brings us all the way up to today, where, as I mentioned, I'm a senior product manager. So I thought it was really good to ground us first in the importance of cybersecurity. I suspect you all agree with this already, but I just wanted to talk about it from an economical point of view for a second. So the World Economic Forum produce a really interesting report every year called the Global Risk Report. And for some time now, they have included cybersecurity failure as one of the top risks. So, of course, we could all name many of the reasons why we should care about cybersecurity. You've heard about it from several of the speakers already, from SCADA systems through to the importance of testing your own security, both physically and digitally. But it's really interesting that something as broad as the economy and the globe is recognised by the WEF as, a really important thing. So you can see over the next couple of years, I think it's 7th and then pushing down to 8th over the 2 to 5 year horizon, ahead of things like biodiversity loss, the asset bubble burst, the debt crisis. Cybersecurity is seen as more important than all of those things, which is really telling when you think about, how often it is underfunded, underappreciated. So let's move into the blue team. So this is from my point of view. There's many different definitions of what it means, but when I say the blue team, I'm referring to security operations. Some people might say SOC, which stands for Security Operations Center, but fundamentally for me, it comes down to being a defender or being a protector. So splitting that into 4 areas, I think that is about helping to prepare your defenses, so getting ready. It's about detecting threats, so being aware and watching. Responding to incidents when they're detected, and fundamentally recovering the business. It's a nice little graphic here that popped on my Instagram several years ago, and I always include it. Because when I think back to doing night shifts in a deep, dark dungeon in Sighthill in Edinburgh, it reminds me of this nice little cartoon. So let's talk about prepared defences. This is going to start with fundamentally understanding what the threat is. This is often referred to as the threat landscape. This is often done via threat research, threat intelligence. And then you need to answer, what are you protecting? This is commonly referred to as your attack surface. Your attack surface is fundamentally to answer the question, know thyself. What is it that you are trying to protect. And this is achieved through forms of organizational intelligence, asset management, crown jewels analysis, etc. So you now have the threats, the things that are looking to do you harm, and you know what they would do harm to if they did something. Understanding your vulnerability in relation to those two things is known as your security posture. And this is often achieved via threat modeling, vulnerability management programs, security testing, pen testing, red teaming. It is to essentially ascertain the gap in your defenses. Within those gaps, this is when you're going to look to put in place protective controls or preventative controls. So that is about how you protect yourself against those threats. And protection is a great place to start when it comes to cybersecurity, although as we all know, it's not the place that you finish. There is a whole bunch of different types of protective tools defined there, and protection also comes in the form, of course, in people and process, as well as the technologies that they use. So there's an absolute huge amount and massive industry behind protective controls, and they're all very important. So now we've prepared ourselves, what's next? Well, we then want to detect. So we know that our protections are never going to withstand all attackers all the time, and this is why it's so important to detect threats. So we start this by being threat-led in our mental models. So this is thinking like an adversary, and this can be assisted by the definition of a purple team, which is essentially a nice interplay between those that are defending and those that spend most of their time thinking like attackers, i.e. pen testers, red teamers, and the interplay between them and the cross-functional team is often referred to as a purple team. So you're already threat-led. You now need to develop what I would refer to as detections in depth. So you don't just want one detection. You don't just want a security camera or a laser. You want something that is going to detect across all the different parts of your attack surface, all the different layers of your organization and its digital footprint. So you're going to often do this through detection engineering, which is when you essentially specify the threat that you're trying to protect and specify the control you're looking to put into place. And you're going to do that via prototyping. If you're a mature organization, you're hopefully applying some form of software development lifecycle to detection engineering. And this is going to require access to data, i.e. telemetry from your endpoints, from your network, from your cloud, from other security tools, and indeed as many places as possible. You're going to then deploy and test those detections. So you're going to hopefully leverage DevOps practices like continuous integration, continuous deployment. You're going to hopefully deploy things like unit testing and automatic deployment of your detections in a lifecycle that's very easy to maintain. And then comes the important part in many ways, which is the monitoring and investigation. So you've now got your detections and they fire alerts or cases. They need to be triaged, contextualized, and investigated. So your triaging is often, is this actually a perceivable threat, or is it possibly a false positive or a benign positive? You're going to then try and provide contextualization. So you might have a user ID, but who is the actual user? Who's their line manager? What's their job? Or if it's an asset like a computer or a cloud asset, what is it used for? Who owns it? What software is running on it? That is all providing context to your investigation, which enables you to do determination. So determination is all about confidence, and there's multiple approaches to confidence, but fundamentally you're trying to ascertain whether it's an actual threat or not, and if you identify it is a threat, what is the perceived impact? This is then when we, of course, move into response. So first and foremost, before hopefully you've detected a threat, you've done that preparation that you talked about. And in incident response, there is very specific types of preparation that are very important. So there's your policies and processes, your guidelines, playbooks, so essentially your documentation and your training. But then there's your proof of that training, your testing of it. So that's done through tabletop exercises, role plays, incident tests, where you essentially try and make sure that you're ready to respond in ways that you think. In the actual incident management process, you're first of all going to do identification, so incident validation essentially. So somebody, possibly yourself, has suspected there's a threat. That happens in detection, but you want to validate that. You don't just want to trust that everyone's done their job. You want to make sure that both the tools and the people involved have truly understood what it is that technology and people are telling them. Your analysis is to try and understand the broader impact to your organization. And this is often looking at the depth and breadth of the compromise, the stage of the attack phase or kill chain that the attacker might be in. And you should, of course, be documenting everything, as that's critical to both lessons learned and hopefully understanding the root cause of the incident. You then move to the stage which is, collectively called get out, i.e. you believe someone's got in, how do you get them out? And that is containment and eradication. So you're hopefully going to have prepared playbooks where there's a malware event or a ransomware event or a defacement of your website, that you have common playbooks that help keep you on track. You're never going to cover every eventuality, but if you can cover the basics, it's going to help keep you on task, especially when you might be fatigued or under stress. You're often going to have instant commanders or managers that are going to help you coordinate and make sure that you're doing the right things at the right time and the right people are informed. And you may well be liaising with legal support, the police, and therefore in some cases you are going to be asked to prioritise evidence collection for legal proceedings, or indeed possibly even for arrests and police investigations. The final stage is recovery, but we're about to cover that shortly. So now think about the end of an incident. You've recovered the business, you've contained and got out the adversary. The lessons learned is really important. So no one is ever going to do things perfect all the time. And so the key thing to do is look at what went wrong, look over what you've documented, think back to when you were perhaps emotional and made mistakes, or when you were overwhelmed and made mistakes. Let's document all that down and improve all of those things and prepare for the next time where hopefully you'll do an even better job. So moving to the fourth thing, and I think in a lot of ways the ultimate outcome that security operations is there to deliver, and that is recovering the business. So recovering its operation or business as usual. So all that's come before this might be the most interesting part of security operations or being in the blue team, but what the business cares most about is business continuity and ensuring that the business is able to operate healthily, even despite an attack. So first and foremost, again, preparation. So, in certain circumstances, how would the business survive? That's often called continuity planning. That is often something that will not be the sole responsibility of security, but security will be an active stakeholder and operator within that process. So alignment within the business stakeholders and the overall IT functions will be key. Your role will often be coordination and support. So recovering the actual business is rarely going to be your primary responsibility. You will be dealing with the threat side of it, whereas it's often other business professionals or IT professionals will be dealing with the continuity part. So do bear in mind that cybersecurity threats, adversaries are rarely going to be the most important consideration to the business. They're going to be, in some cases, thinking existentially about the business's survival. In some industries, that may include people's lives, people's jobs. So think about your role and your priorities within that situation, and how you can be the best possible supporter and coordinator to support the ultimate goals of the business. One of the most important metrics is mean time to recovery. So ultimately, how long from business interruption, i.e. business cannot do its operation in a normal way, to the point it can continue operation. That is your mean time to recovery, and is a common metric that businesses will use to measure the success of their overall business continuity program. So they are the main areas of what the blue team do. So now let's talk about the people that often work in the blue teams, and I'm going to focus primarily on some career advice here, and then talk about some of the common roles. So first and foremost, career advice should always be listened to with a massive pinch of salt from anybody, and anyone that tells you you should do X should be interrogated very carefully to make sure that they're not leading you on a path that's full of their own personal bias. So there's never one path to success. It is an incredibly diverse industry we work in, and there are many paths, if not almost unlimited paths to success. Don't think, and indeed don't go down the wrong paths in particular though, and that is, don't assume every path is technical. Don't believe that your current skill set will be the future skill set needed by the industry and by businesses. Definitely don't assume other people should follow the way you did it. They're not you, you're not them, and your lives are very different and often will diverge in many places. Don't assume that if you are technical that they're the only skills you need. We live again in a world where cross-functional working and teams and all kinds of other skills are required, but I'll get to some of those things later. And just basically don't assume anything. Be hungry, ask questions, try and learn things, try something, and if it doesn't work out, try something else. If I could give you some advice, it would be, be kind first and fundamentally in almost everything you do wherever possible. Be hungry, so be hungry for knowledge, be hungry for experiences, and go after them. Ask questions and break things, although ideally in safe ways. The reality of a career is that, you have taken a certain path so far, and that is a fixed path, even though you had other options. But the future is essentially almost limitless depending on the choices you make. So regardless of your successes and regardless of your challenges or your failures, they're in the past and there's nothing you can do about them. All you can do is choose the paths and the pain that you're willing to suffer for the pursuit of what it is that you want out of life. So common entry roles within blue teams, these are the ones that I've had the most experience in hiring for and seen as kind of entry roles within the blue teams, and it very much depends on your experience and your skill set. But you've got the security analyst, also sometimes referred to as the security operator. They're going to be responsible for a lot of that detect phase that we talked about. So doing triaging of security alerts or observations, doing some of the investigation. They might recommend next steps. They'll hopefully support any active incidents. They might be involved in preparing report writing, research, and indeed proactive detection, which is threat hunting. So when you don't know there's something out there, nothing's alerted you to it, but you go and you interrogate your logs, you interrogate your systems to try and find activity of threats. There is an overlap with a security engineer, although an engineer will often have more of a coding background, not necessarily an expert developer, but will be familiar with scripting and configuring systems in complex ways. So they're often going to be responsible for building detections within the various security tools at your disposal. They might be involved in automating some of those systems and designing the overall security solutions that you're trying to put in place. They may indeed contribute to security architecture within the security operations team or wider teams, and they're definitely, in most cases, going to be involved in installing or configuring security software, SIEMs, EDRs, NDRs, antivirus. There's all different tools they may get involved in. And similarly, security analysts, they're also often going to involve themselves in threat research. But these are certainly not the only careers, and I'm not going to go through all of these. I would recommend digitalworld.net, which is a great tool developed by Skills Development Scotland that talks about some of the careers. There's many resources like these online, and I recommend everyone that is interested in careers in cyber goes and have a look. You'll notice that several of these are not deeply technical, like risk advisor, for example, or auditor. There are many roles for many different types of people, so please do have a look. Getting down to the final section of this presentation, it's going to be around competencies. So I'm going to share with you some of what I believe are much needed technical and behavioral competencies within cybersecurity, especially within the blue team. Some people might call these hard and soft skills. I prefer to use more descriptive language like technical and behavioral, because I think hard and soft can often be seen as one's primary, one's secondary, and I don't believe that's the case whatsoever. And you can be deeply technical, but without the right behaviors, it's unlikely for you to have a successful career, and vice versa. You might be an excellent communicator, but you still have to have the technical skills to do your job. And in this context, technical doesn't necessarily mean technical as in technology. It could just mean that, if your job is to be a designer, your technical skills might be operating your design tools, for example. So here's some of the foundational competencies that I believe are very important for those working within cybersecurity, especially within the blue team. So networking principles and understanding how networks work. Doesn't mean you need to be a networking engineer, but understanding some of the basics will be very advantageous as many threats are detected within the network. Understanding network protection technologies, firewalls, proxies, etc., and understanding how they work is advantageous. It really helps you understand what might have gotten in the way of an attack or indeed setting up a new system. Operating systems and endpoints, so your standard Windows, Linux, Mac, how they're used, how they might be administered. The ability to use basic command line tools can be very useful, especially when triaging problems and trying to set up systems. And indeed, physical versus virtualized, so the difference between, a bare metal device or indeed something that's virtualized, whether that is on a traditional virtual machine or whether that's in a container or indeed serverless or function as a service type software. On the other side is then more comprehension around the threats that are out there. So what is malware? What types of families exist? What are some of the research tools at your disposal, like VirusTotal or Cuckoo? Internal versus external threats. There are, of course, both. And indeed, the basics of application security, with OWASP's Top 20 being a great resource to learn some of that information. And awareness frameworks, again, not being an expert, but just understanding what they are and how they're used. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, the CIS critical security controls is a great resource to see how to harden the most common types of uses for computers, and is brilliant. And indeed, ISO 27001 is a useful thing to have an awareness of, and as is PCI DSS. Again, an awareness of software development, so not being a programmer, but something is very useful is scripting, whether that's in Bash and Shell, whether that's in actual programming language like Python or Golang. Being aware of the secure software development lifecycle and where the handoffs might be, and indeed application security testing, so static and dynamic security testing, and finally a little awareness of databases goes a long way, like SQL and NoSQL types. Some emerging areas, which I think some are more emerging than others, some are actually now more foundational than they used to be, would certainly be an awareness of cloud technologies, so the public cloud and tools like Amazon Web Services, Google GCP, Azure, etc., and edge computing, like Cloudflare or the edge computing offered by the previously mentioned public cloud vendors, the difference between software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, etc. And then, again, moving into more like the container world, a container management world, with Docker, Kubernetes, etc., and function as a service like Lambda, being, again, things to have a good awareness of, and the differences and the types of security differences between them are all emerging and advantageous knowledge sets, because there are now many companies that are essentially cloud first, where they simply do not have a traditional edge. They do not have endpoints in the way you might think of them, and understanding the differences, I think, is very important. A knowledge of big data tools, so whether that's search and analytic tools or SIEMs like Elastic, Hadoop, Splunk, Humio, stream processing, so like Kafka, Pulsar, RabbitMQ, and Message Queue that could be leveraged for detection of threats, and then visualization tools as well, like Linkurious, Kibana, NeoDash. Some of the search and SIEM ones have these built in as well, so that can be useful for report writing or trying to visualize things in a way that's more appropriate for people that are perhaps not as technical. Frameworks that leverage MITRE ATT&CK and the kill chain and very advantageous attack in particular is an incredible resource and knowledge repository and ontology that essentially tries to represent threat actors or adversaries and the relationship between them and what they try and achieve through their tactics and techniques. It's constantly being updated. It's got an incredible team behind it, and I highly recommend anyone who doesn't know how to use it using it more. Defensive tactics and techniques are important. So MITRE Defend, which is a relatively new project, which I think is still in beta, is very useful, and it's mapped against attack for understanding the countermeasures or the security controls you might put in place. There's MITRE Engage, which is a really interesting model as well, which is more like engaging with the adversary and what you might be able to do to disrupt an active attack. And then you've got the hunting maturity model, you've got the Sigma library of detections, and open source intelligence. All of these things are fantastic tools for defensive teams, for the blue team. And finally, DevOps practices. So, DevOps is essentially the vehicle in which modern software is developed and released, and understanding how they work and how that works on a continuous basis is very important for modern blue teamers, because these are ultimately going to be the people deploying software that is sometimes going to be vulnerable, and if they're deploying it very rapidly, how you can interact with them and how you can help them establish guardrails to secure themselves is very important. So now we've talked about technical, let's talk about behavioral. These are 6 behaviors or behavioral areas that I think are very important. And, these are not things you can tick off, where it's like, oh, yeah, done, I've completed that. But they are things to keep in mind. And often using that first one of self-awareness is the ability to be aware of your own emotions, where your strengths lie, and where your weaknesses might lie and where you might have impact on others. So with your self-awareness, the others can then follow a little bit easier. So self-regulation, so wisely managing your emotions, especially around other people, especially at work, and making sure appropriate boundaries are in place. Showing empathy, I think, is absolutely underrated, and fortunately improving, but the ability to identify and understand other people's emotions and show them compassion. Motivation, so the ability to recognize what motivates you. When you're unmotivated, what can you do to change that? When do you need a break, etc. Your social skills, so managing relationships to the benefit of everyone, not just yourself. And finally, that to foster belonging. So that can be in just simply the way you treat your colleagues, but if you're a manager, if you're a leader, then that comes more down to how you foster a culture of belonging through being, being inclusive, showing kindness, and making sure that you're aware of differences or beliefs that might influence their behaviour, and being empathetic and kind to them throughout. Right, so I think that's me. There's a whole bunch of resources. I'll share all these on Twitter because they're all links, obviously. So do feel free to reach out. I'll obviously make the slides available to the beer farms as well to distribute if they'd like to. And do feel free to reach out. You can reach me via email, Twitter, LinkedIn, Keybase if you want to keep things uber secure. And please do let me know if you've got any questions.
Well, everyone's been clapping here.